Good evening. I'm Alan Jackson. Welcome to Nashville. It's hard to watch the news these days without noticing the unnerving number of countries at war. Women and children and thousands of troops injured and dying, and no end in sight despite years of fighting. In Ukraine, it's been going on since February of 2022, almost 3 years now, when Russia began the invasion. The war in Syria began 14 years ago in 2011. In Israel, it was October the 7th, well over a year ago, 6:30 in the morning. The drug-infused Hamas terrorists called it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Thousands of rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel, all within just 20 minutes. It wasn't a war with troops. It was a heinous attack on women, children, fathers, and mothers who had gathered outdoors to listen to music. Well, thank God there are brave peacekeepers around us, the brave men and women in the U.S. military who lay down their lives to protect us. We have 2 million active military personnel and another 800,000 civilians already on station. And you can also see our veterans everywhere, proudly wearing the caps that brand their missions, from Pearl Harbor to the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. One thing is very clear: the United States has the best fighting force and the very best weapons in the world. So we are very pleased to welcome back Captain Chuck Nash. Listen to his military record. Chuck spent 4,300 hours in the air in defense of this country. He had an even more impressive 965 aircraft carrier landings. It's hard to wrap my head around landing a fighter jet 965 times on an aircraft, even when the weather was bad and the ocean was choppy. Well, in a moment, we'll visit with Captain Nash and hear what it takes to stay in front of the enemy. I'll be back in just a moment. Captain Nash, welcome back to Nashville.
My pleasure to be back with you, Pastor.
Well, I want to begin with a new report from the Pentagon about China. China has added a huge new arsenal of nuclear weapons, and they've also built a thorough digital disinformation campaign. Both have been built in preparation for an attack on the United States. You might wonder why China would want to attack the U.S., given how dependent they are on our economy. Tell us what you think is up with the Chinese and why now?
Well, on the eve of World War I, trade within Europe was at an all-time high, and World War I broke out. I don't know that the Chinese want to attack the United States as much as they want to demonstrate what they could do if it came to that. So what they're trying to do is classic Sun Tzu, which is, fight the enemy in his mind so that you don't have to really fight him, that the enemy will collapse without fighting. So I think that's what's going on there. As far as signals and what is going on internationally with China, in 1962, Rebecca Walsetter wrote a book about looking back on the attack on Pearl Harbor and how we missed that, how our intelligence services missed it, when there were signals and we really should have picked up on it. Well, the Japanese were trying to hide their intentions. President Xi in China is not. He is coming out and saying what they will do, and then he's backing it up not only with military exercises, but he's backing it up with military procurement. They've already got the biggest Navy in the world. They've surpassed the U.S. Navy in quantity. Now, quality, that's up for grabs, but quantity, yeah. And like I think it was Admiral Gorshkov, the Russian, said quantity has a quality all of its own. So as we've learned with the war in Ukraine, it's not about fires and maneuver. It's more like trench warfare. So quantity is going to matter. And right now we have been depleting our assets at a horrendous rate, and we're not buying the replacement weapons and parts in the rate that we're expending them and giving them away.
You've talked about the magnitude of their Navy. Can you help us understand their weapons just a bit versus our own, whether we have a defense that could fend them off if we were attacked?
They have the world's most robust shipbuilding capability. They are building warships they're turning them out monthly, and they have their own indigenous submarine capability, as well as building the frigates and the cruisers, and now they have 3 aircraft carriers. So they are building a navy that surpasses ours in number. They're stealing a lot of the technology required to make that robust quantitative navy a qualitative navy. It's up to, as always in warfare, it's, yes, the equipment, but really it's about the logistics and the morale of those in uniform that are doing the fighting. And right now, you have to look at what it would take logistically for us to support a major war in the South China Sea and those areas, as opposed to them fighting in their backyard with a much bigger navy on a defensive situation, which is where, quite frankly, the Ukrainians are right now with the Russians. Winter is setting in, and that winter benefits the defending force. Because when you think about it, if you're dug in a trench, your supply line always has to go to your trench. If you're fighting an aggressive offensive campaign, your supplies have to follow you. So it's up to the Ukrainians right now to hold what they have and let the Russians try to attack that. But in the meantime, they're going to have to start getting serious. And even Zelensky has said recently that they just can't do what has been asked of them by the international community to take on the Russians, that they're wearing out, that it's too thin. And I think they're going to have to look at what you and I talked about in a previous visit, which is they're going to have to do the carrot and the stick. Zelensky's going to have to give up something, and the Russians are going to have to give up something. But both right now are very, very brittle. And they're both, I think, are in a mindset to look for peace, to stop this. And I think incoming President Trump is the guy to make that happen, to give them both a way of saving face with their domestic populations.
Well, I want to move on to some of the other hot spots mentioned at the beginning of the show. Let's start with Syria. What's our interest there? We still have about 900 military staff in Syria keeping an eye on ISIS or al-Qaeda. But what are our other interests there?
Our other interests are maintaining some semblance of order and bringing it so that we don't have another humanitarian crisis where you have hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing into the neighboring countries. Syria is a mix of mostly Sunnis. There are Christians, there are Druze, multiple groups that we don't want to create another Syrian refugee crisis. We want to get the people back into Syria, get them back into their homes. There's going to be a massive rebuilding effort because the country has been so destroyed. And then the question is, what about this new government, this new group that's taken over, the HTS, and this Mohammed al-Jalani? He's now wearing jackets to his interviews. He's trying to assuage fears that he was a former al-Qaeda chieftain, that the United States used to have a $10 million bounty on him, and that we had him jailed in Iraq because he was fighting U.S. forces as part of al-Qaeda. Well, now all of a sudden he's the leader of this group, and he's saying, no, we're going to protect the minorities. We're going to watch over the Christians. We want to have a peaceful country so that we're a good neighbor to the community. Well, that remains to be seen because his past certainly doesn't say that. But he's saying, no, I left my al-Qaeda past back in 2016. We shall see. But our interest is in protecting Israel as the only democracy and our ally in that region. And would like to see a stable Syria on that border.
I want to stay in Syria just a moment. Assad and the Alawites have been in charge there for quite a while. With his departure, they're a minority. Are they safe or are they facing elimination?
I think they face the same peril as do the Christians and the Druze. We will see what happens there, but when you think about Assad leaving, what a strategic loss that is for Iran. I mean, I just keep coming back to it. That they've spent decades and billions of dollars funding Hezbollah, Hamas, and Syria, and they've lost it all. They have lost it all. And, you know, Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence, we said, don't go after Hezbollah in Lebanon. Don't do it, because it'll create a war where thousands of Israelis will be killed. And Netanyahu heard their advice, rejected it, and look where they are now. They strategically have defeated Iran because Iran now has lost all of its proxies except the Houthis, and they're on thin ice.
It's a remarkable shift of influence in the Middle East. I mean, there's this important question now, who's really going to step into that void and fill the vacuum? But at the moment, it seems like Israel has expanded those buffer zones on all of their northern border.
Yes, they have, wisely, because now all of a sudden, if this government, this new group, I call it a government, but if this new group turns out to be stable and good, they have ground where they can negotiate back to the original positions in Golan. If they turn out to be not so friendly and a threat, they have extended the buffer zone that they can use to increase their strategic depth.
Did Biden compound the problems in the Middle East with his bungled troop withdrawal in Afghanistan? Trump certainly thinks so.
Afghanistan, the most embarrassing day in the history of our country, and none of the generals got fired for the incompetence that they showed. Most embarrassing moment. We would have left with dignity and strength. We would have taken our $85 billion worth of equipment. We would have taken our hostages. We lost 13 great people. We had 47 people obliterated, the arms, the legs, the face, obliterated. What a horrible day it was.
Outside of the many Americans who were killed, is the potential for a regional war even closer now with Iran, Lebanon, Israel, and now Syria in the fighting mode?
Well, there again, that remains to be seen as well. One could look at it and say, look, Iran has just lost all of their proxies. Their ability to expand their revolution has failed. They have no air defenses because the Israelis took care of that too. They are extremely vulnerable, worse than probably the day that they took over from the Shah. They're probably at their weakest moment right now. So do they recoil in fear and then step up and really go for building out a nuclear arsenal, thinking, well, we have to do something, we have to have this? Or do they look at this and see this Trump movement coming in and saying, well, maybe we ought to talk to this guy, because I think he is reaching out to the Iranians, just as he had with some of our other potential adversaries, to say, look, there's a new sheriff in town. Here's a chance for you to cut a new deal going forward, because where we are as a human species, it's not looking good. There's too much turmoil. There's too much death. And we've got to turn this around. And I think there are a lot of countries that are going to want to grab that carrot and work with him. And I think he's the guy to do it. But again, we have to see.
Well, Captain Nash, before we close, let's come back stateside. We've had an invasion of criminals in this country with the open borders and freewheeling drug cartels selling illegal drugs across the country. Would you agree with the president-elect that we should consider using the U.S. military to go into Mexico and shut down the drug lords?
Mexico is a failed narco state with an industrial capability. The government is suspect all the way from the top to the bottom. And it's not because they're necessarily bad people. It's because the cartels have such outreach and such depth of reach that they have threatened the families and the livelihoods of anybody who's anybody in authority in Mexico. They are incapable of taking care of this. It was based on a thing called the Caroline Affair, where some people on the U.S. side crossed the river into Canada and did some damage and some piracy, and British troops followed them back, found a boat, the Caroline, tied to a U.S. pier, and they set fire to it, and there was a guy in the hold who died. Well, after the Revolutionary War, this actually went to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that if a nation state knows of illegal activity and is either unwilling or incapable of dealing with it, then others can. That's where we are with our southern border. You can look back to the Caroline Affair and see that if the Mexican authorities are unwilling or incapable, then the U.S. has every right under international law to take care of it, and we will.
Well, Chuck Nash, it's great to have you here as always. Blessings to your family and friends during this Christmas season, and we'll see you again in the new year.
Looking forward to it, Pastor. Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Thank you. Well, in a moment, I'll have some thoughts of my own to consider. They'll help you absorb what Chuck Nash told us about the growing global threats. We'll be right back. You know, the truth is we live in a world that's full of conflict and turmoil, and if you pay much attention, that gives rise to stress and worry. If you're not paying attention, maybe not. But I mean, there is a host of problems around the globe. The war in Ukraine with Russia continues to boil. There's been more than 1 million casualties in that conflict. The Middle East continues with the turmoil and the conflict. Syria has melted. They don't exist as a nation anymore. The continent of Africa, there's turmoil there. Our borders have been open. Untold millions of people have flooded into our country, overwhelming our schools, our healthcare systems. They're challenging our cities. There's no shortage of problems. Well, it's Christmas time, and often we're thinking about gifts and presents. I want to make a suggestion. I've got a gift that we can give to the Lord. I promise it's related to the conflict and the turmoil in the world. The Bible says that we can cast all of our care on Him because He cares for us. So here's my suggestion. Let's bundle up all that worry and agitation and frustration and anxiety, all the stress that comes with a world in turmoil, and let's give it to the Lord. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, folks. If worrying would fix it, I would organize worry groups, but it won't. So let's give God the gift of our trust in Him and hand off all the things that we've been carrying stress over. That's a better place, and if we'll do that, I promise you there's more reasons for hope than despair. Well, that's my message for tonight, and after a short break, we're going to start looking at your messages. We've got emails. Thank you for taking the time to send us your thoughts, your emails. They're important to us. Joe and Rose from California. Hi, Pastor Allen. My wife and I enjoy your encouraging show. Thank you for incorporating Scripture in your thoughts at the end. We agree that there's more reason for hope than despair in Jesus. God bless you in everything that you do. Merry Christmas. You know, it's a holiday season, and that often comes with joy and some despair. I want to make a suggestion. This Christmas season, let's cultivate being grateful. Ever since the election, I've been walking around with this deep sense of gratitude. I believe God showed us mercy when we deserved judgment. And every day I've walked around just quietly within me saying, God, I thank you for your goodness to us, for your mercy, your grace. You have blessed us in so many ways. It's not a perfect Christmas season. I lost my mom this year. There are reasons we can grieve, but there is much to celebrate. Let's be thankful. It'll make this holiday season better. God's watching over us. We can trust Him with that. Well, make sure you send your emails to comments@allenjacksonnow.com. From all of us here in Nashville, thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.